This is part 4 and hopefully the last section of the recorded lectures on tissues. So now we are discussing or learning about tissue membranes. Membranes are physical barriers that line or cover portions of the body. They consist of both epithelium and connective tissue usually, but synovial membranes are only connective tissue. But most of the membranes, mucus, serous, and cutaneous, are epithelial and connective tissue together. So we've got 4 types of membranes: mucous membranes, serous membranes, synovial membranes, and cutaneous membranes. Sorry about my phone. Okay, so mucous membranes line passageways that open to the exterior. So what we're talking about here are mucous membranes that line the digestive tract, the anus, the respiratory tract, the urinary tract, and the reproductive tracts, like the female vagina, and for men it would be the urethra for urinary and reproductive. The epithelial surfaces of mucous membranes are kept moist at all times by mucus secretions. And the connective tissue layer is typically areolar, and the type of epithelial tissue can vary. Serous membranes, there are 3. There is a serous membrane that lines the lungs, one that lines the abdominal organs, and then one that lines the heart. So each serous membrane consists of 2 layers. One is called the parietal layer, and that will be the outside layer. It will lie back against the body wall. So that's why it says lining the inner surface of the cavity. So it's really against the wall of the cavity. I always think about it like that. It lies against the wall of the cavity. The visceral membrane is the part of the serous membrane that actually comes into contact with organs. And then the fluid between the 2 layers is called serous fluid, and it functions to reduce friction. The pleura is the membrane that lines the pleural cavities and covers the lungs. The peritoneum lines the peritoneal cavity and covers abdominal organs. And the pericardium lines the pericardial cavity and covers the heart. Then let's see, hold on a minute. They don't really have this, but I know there's questions about it. So just just to make this clear, for example, the parietal pericardium. The parietal pericardium lies against the wall of the pericardial cavity, and then the visceral pericardium is actually attached to the heart itself. The cutaneous membrane is the skin. The epithelial tissue is stratified squamous epithelial tissue. The connective tissue, or the dermis of the skin, is areolar tissue, and dense irregular connective tissue. Synovial membranes line joints that are freely movable. So your knee joint, your elbow joint, your shoulder joint, your hip joint, the joints between your fingers and toes, freely moving, articulating joint cavities. They consist primarily of areolar connective tissue and an incomplete layer of epithelial tissue. Synovial membranes protect the ends of bones at the joints because they produce a viscous or thick synovial fluid which lubricates the joint. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction. The protein fibers or protein filaments that contract are called myosin, actin and myosin, myosin and actin and myosin. Muscle tissue can be controlled voluntarily, or it can be controlled. It can be automatically controlled by the nervous system. There are three types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle has a striated appearance due to the arrangement of the actin and the myosin. It's voluntary. It's got many nuclei per cell, so they're multinucleated cells. Cardiac muscle is also striated, but it's involuntary. The cardiac muscle cells are connected by intercalated disc. You only find cardiac muscle tissue in the heart. Oh, and it is also, the muscle cells are branching. They branch. And smooth muscle has no striations or stripes. It's involuntary, and you find smooth muscle lining the walls of blood vessels, lining hollow organs such as the urinary bladder, lining the digestive tract, lining the walls of the stomach, the uterus, the bladder, the trachea. Anywhere that some type of material is going to be moved through a tube, whether it's solid material such as the digestive tract, whether it's liquid such as the urinary tract, or even if it's air like the respiratory tract, or blood as in the blood vessels. Okay. Nervous tissue is specialized for conduction. Nervous tissue is concentrated mostly in the brain and the spinal cord, but it also composes the nerves that extend from the brain and the spinal cord. Neural cells are either called neurons, and these are the nerve cells that actually send impulses. They have a very limited ability to repair after injury. Neuroglia are the supporting cells for the neurons. Now we're going to talk about the response to tissue injury. Tissues respond to injuries to maintain homeostasis, an internal balance within our cells and within our organs in our body. Cells restore homeostasis with two processes: inflammation and regeneration. The tissue's first response to injury is inflammation, or the inflammatory response. And the cardinal signs of the inflammatory response are swelling, heat, redness, and pain. And this is a chart that explains the inflammatory response. The inflammatory response can be triggered by trauma or physical injury, or it can be triggered by infection or extreme temperatures. In the inflammatory response, mast cells are stimulated and they release histamine and heparin. And what that does is it enlarges or dilates blood vessels. Which increases blood flow to the injured region. And that is why we have the redness and the heat. The blood vessel walls are more permeable or leaky, and that's what leads to the swelling. And then the pain is due to the swelling and release of chemicals. But this process, the inflammatory response, is necessary to speed the removal of waste products and toxins. And then the second phase is called regeneration, and that is when the damaged tissues are replaced or repaired. The first thing that happens is that fibroblasts, remember these are cells that produce fibers. Fibroblasts produce scar tissue. And this permanent replacement of normal tissue is called fibrosis. You may have heard the word fibrosis when hearing news about COVID-19, because they say that in the advanced stages of COVID-19, fibrosis occurs in the lungs. And so that's replacement of lung tissue with scar tissue, basically. I've heard it referred to as that lung tissue rots, but it really just gets replaced with scar tissue that can't be used to um, exchange gases. You know, it can't be used to breathe. Um, Tissues that have good regeneration ability are epithelial tissue, most connective tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. But tissues that have poor regeneration ability is cardiac muscle, heart muscle tissue, skeletal muscle, cartilage, and neural tissue or nerve tissue. Okay, and just really quickly, when we get older, the body's ability to repair damaged tissue declines. An older person can get an injury and it not repair itself, you know, for weeks and weeks, whereas a younger person can get an injury and be fine in a few days. And older people are more likely to get cancer, which is just mitosis that has gone out of control. So tissue cells will divide and divide and form a tumor a lot more often with older people.